Well, let's get started today. We'll try to get you out of here since it's Mother's Day and you want to beat all the Baptists and United Methodists to the buffets. I know that. So. And I'm not making any assumptions by that. I'm not castigating shame on Baptists or anything like that. Because we know the Apostle Paul said that he buffeted his body, right? So it's biblical. So we're going to talk today just about some of the things that are going on in Bible prophecy, or things that are related to things that are coming in the end time, consistent with what we talk about every week about the convergence of events. As we get closer to the ultimate return of the Lord, we'll begin to see things unfold more and more quickly. And we do see that acceleration, particularly the last few weeks. It's been quite a rapid unfolding of things geopolitically and elsewhere in the world. I'm going to read a few verses just to kind of lay a foundation for some of the things that I found significant in the news this week. And I think you'll be able to see them as we go through. You'll be able to pick up what news events and that type of thing I'll be talking about and how they relate to these scriptures. The first scripture is a scripture in Daniel chapter 8 that talks about the rise of the Antichrist. And it sort of lays out some of the early portions of his career and what he will be doing during that early portion. Now remember, we put up a timeline of the 70th week of Daniel. The Antichrist will not immediately come to full power at the beginning of the 70th week. It's a progressive thing that happens. He gets stronger as time goes on, and then his ultimate revelation will come when he goes into the rebuilt temple and commits what's known as the abomination of desolation at the middle of the 70th week. And then Jesus says, and then there shall be great tribulation. And I personally believe that's when the time of Jacob's trouble begins, because before that, Israel will be at peace, seemingly. They'll have a covenant. Now, there's a lot of controversies about what the covenant is and that type of thing. I happen to believe it's an existing peace agreement that will be confirmed or strengthened. And so Israel initially will be at peace. In fact, when Jesus described the events of the 70th week to a few of the disciples there on Mount of Olives, known as the Olivet Discourse, he said, when you see that event happen, the abomination of desolation, then you flee. The implication of that is, or the conclusion you can reach from that is, you really don't need to flee until you see that happen. But when you see that happen, you got to get out of town right away. So that's when I think the real trouble begins. And I know I've got good friends who disagree, so but we can argue and discuss that. But in Daniel chapter 8, it describes the early days of the career of the Antichrist, and his power shall be mighty, verse 24, but not by his own power, and he shall destroy wonderfully and shall prosper in practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. And through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without hand. Apologize for that. I have not coughed all morning until I got up here. And usually I don't have trouble when I'm up here talking, but the last couple of weeks it's been a struggle up here. So that he will come, and through peace he will destroy many. Now he will be destroyed there, but he shall be broken without hand means that his ultimate destruction will come not through human agency. It will come at the hands of Jesus Christ when he returns. But he'll be deceitful, he'll be manipulative, and through a push for peace, many will be destroyed. So everybody will be saying, oh, everything's great, this guy is fantastic, but They'll be ignoring the reality of what's happening. In Zechariah 14, it says, "For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city shall be taken, and the houses rifled, and the women ravished, and half the city shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city." So we see that in the end, the nations will gather against Israel. We see that in Daniel chapter 8. He just said that there will be, what's it say? And he shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. He'll be coming after certain people. And the nations will come eventually to finish them off. And we know what happens. That's when Jesus Christ returns and a remnant is saved. There's also verses in Isaiah chapter 17 that talk about certain areas that we read a lot about in the news today, specifically Syria, areas of Syria and Damascus. Isaiah chapter 17, verse 1, "The burden of Damascus, behold, Damascus is taken away from being a city, and it shall be a ruinous heap. The cities of Arar are forsaken, and shall be for flocks which shall lie down, and none shall make them afraid. The fortress also shall cease from Ephraim, and the kingdom from Damascus, and the remnant of Syria. It shall be as the glory of the children of Israel, saith the Lord of hosts." In fact, we could go through multiple passages that talk about the ultimate, what happens to these Arab nations specifically. There's many prophecies that talk about it will be revived, how the Persian people will be revived. There will be a revival. But there's a lot of trouble in between, and a lot of people will be destroyed. That's what the scripture tells us. So with that in mind, let's just take a look at some of the things that are happening this week that might relate in some way to some of these verses, and many others. I just don't have time to go through all of them. The financial markets continue to be in a bit of a state of flux if you haven't been paying attention. They're up, they're down, they're all over the place. There's talks about we're going to get rid of cash. And there are all these pushes, and frankly, the situation is such that the financial experts of the world are sort of running out of their little bag of tricks. It's empty, and there's not much more that they can do. They've printed trillions of dollars. They've added to balance sheets. They've tried to manipulate things, and they've been pretty clever thus far at keeping things going, although the reality is, for example, the United States, real wages, you've probably noted this, haven't risen for a number of years. You're not really making much more money than you did a few years ago. But we've avoided hyperinflation and that type of thing. But there are bubbles being created. The real estate right now seems to be doing fairly well. Residential real estate, commercial real estate is a bit of a mess. And each week as we see more and more of these large retail chains declare bankruptcy, close hundreds, sometimes hundreds of stores all at once, that will have a major impact on the real estate markets. Where we live right now, we're in a bit of a bubble. Things are pretty good around here, but you don't have to go very far away to find things that are in a bit of a turmoil. I found this interesting. The Financial Times, published overseas, wrote this week about, and this is something that I've talked about quite a bit, about U.S. pensions, particularly public pensions. And it says, it has a very long article analyzing the situation. U.S. public pensions, the crisis is really hard to fix. There's no good answer. The lead picture in the article says there will be bankruptcies. There are going to be multiple municipalities, even states, that are going to have to file for some kind of bankruptcy protection. One of the places where the problem is most acute is in the state of Illinois, where they've refused for years to deal with the problem. And really, have you heard anybody in this election cycle talk about this problem? Do you think you're going to hear anybody talk about this problem? The incentive is to just continue to kick the can down the road and hope that it doesn't collapse on your watch. Listen to this. This is from the article. In Chicago, Ed Bachrach, chairman of the Center for Pension Integrity, a nonprofit organization, and this is from the UK, so that's why they misspell their words over there. We did win that war, by the way, but that's another. I'm going to get email about that, I know. Estimates that to ensure the city's pension funds are fully funded within 20 years, estimates that to ensure the city's pension funds are fully funded within 20 years, Chicago's property tax would have to be increased 85%. But he warns that crippling tax increases could drive taxpayers and businesses away. Boy, that's not a brilliant statement. That's stating the obvious. I mean, how many of us could sit here and say, okay, our property taxes are going to nearly double over the next 5 or 6 years? How many of us would stay in the community? If we could leave, we would leave. Because those kind of tax increases are simply not sustainable. And I'm just saying, from what I've read, that's just the tip of the iceberg. And so that will cause a lot of major fluctuations in the market. Here's something that was reported, not talked about that much. An $81 million sneak attack on the world banking system. Tens of millions of dollars siphoned from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. A shadowy set of casinos in the Philippines, a large bank in Bangladesh with creaky technology, an unknown and perhaps uncatchable group of anonymous thieves with sophisticated hacking skills. What unites this curious cast of characters and enabled one of the most brazen digital bank heists ever is a ubiquitous and highly trusted international bank messaging system called SWIFT, which stands for the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunications. Supposedly super secure, but apparently the article says, but last week for the first time, this is from the front page of the New York Times the other day, hackers captured 81 million from Bangladesh Central Bank in February. SWIFT acknowledged that the thieves have tried to carry out similar heists at other banks on its network by sneaking into the beating heart of the global banking system. So things are not very secure. Most companies now suffer data breaches. There are practice groups and law firms all over the country that are there to advise client on what to do in the event of a data breach. I saw an article, I haven't seen it reported anywhere else, but Kim Commando, who writes on technology issues, she reported on her website the other day that Google, Yahoo, Gmail there's something like 231 million email addresses and passwords have been compromised. And this is the state of the world that we live in. And look, where does this lead to? It leads to people coming up and saying, we've got to come up with a super secure digital system for identification. Now, is that what the mark is? I don't know. There's a lot of speculation about what the mark of the beast is. I think if you read Scripture, the mark of the beast also requires an act of worship, loyalty to the Antichrist. And so that, I think it needs to be coupled with that. Simply having a chip or something like that may not be exactly what the mark is. We'll have to wait and see what happens. This was reported in the UK press also the other day. Lazarus trial to take first step in bringing humans back from the dead. Scientists will attempt to regenerate nervous system in brain-dead patients after winning ethical approval. So that's ethical. I can just sort of see the problems like, someone who really wants to have passed away, they'll be, people will be trying to revive them. They're like, leave me alone. I was fine. It raises a whole host of ethical and religious issues. And I think the fact that it's been approved already ought to be a bit of a red flag. Now, this is a situation that continues to fester, particularly in the United States, with our Justice Department. The Justice Department this week sent a letter to the state of North Carolina saying, the law that you enacted about gender, how people can use bathrooms is discriminatory under federal law, and therefore we're coming after you. And the Department of Transportation is now looking at, can we allow North Carolina to accept any federal funds for highways because they're discriminating against transgender people. Look, folks, the issue's not so much that people assume that transgender people are going to be molesting girls in bathrooms. It's the people who are going to take advantage of that you can't even question it. That's where the problem is, and we need to get the debate and the discussion back on that issue. But listen, the crowd that's pushing this does not care about your daughter. They don't. If they did, they would use reasonable common sense ways or thinking to analyze the situation, and they're not, because they are trying to break down all of the moral codes of society. Now, people think that's overstated. I don't think so. But so the federal government has said, North Carolina, you can't enact a law like this. I said last week there were, the NCAA had issued a letter, a statement that said that if your state or municipality has a law like North Carolina's, you will never get an NCAA Division Championship Series ever. We will not come to your town. It's going to go farther than that. In fact, what the Department of Education has done is they now have what I would call the shame list. Colleges, universities are allowed to write a letter to the Department of Education and say, we want to be exempt for religious reasons from some of your regulations in this regard. Because we have standards, and the Bible says, we have codes of conduct that are based on what the Bible says, and therefore, so the Department of Education has said, okay, we will give you an exemption. You have to write and prove to us that you really have a sincere belief about this. And that's fine, okay? That's what they've decided to do. But now what have they done? They've taken and they've put all the letters that have been written by all the colleges seeking an exemption up on a website. Why? So the activists can go after those colleges and universities. In fact, the LGBT groups have demanded that the NCAA divest from Christian colleges seeking Title IX exemptions. In other words, if you hold to this, you can't even be part of the NCAA. That's where it's going. That's what they want. And do you think that the NCAA has the moral courage to stand up to those demands? What do you think? I mean, what have they done so far? They've issued letters, a statement saying, we're never going to send a championship to anybody that has this policy, that bases their morality on the Bible or their codes of conduct. If you do that, you don't get an NCAA championship. And pretty soon it'll be, I think, you can't even be part of the NCAA. The LGBT group has, this is a copy of the letter that they sent. And the reason why I called it a shame list is that this LGBT group actually has what they call a shame list. And you can look at the video. There's a URL down there, campuspride.org/shame list. And you can see the colleges listed there that have requested these exemptions. It's the same, it's almost a mirror image of what's on the Department of Education website. That's why I referred to the Department of Education website as a shame list. I'm just using their terminology. They call it a shame list, it's a shame list. We're going to shame you into doing what we want. We're going to apply pressure to you. At the same time, there's a columnist, Jason Riley, African-American man, conservative, writes for the Wall Street Journal. You see him on some of the news shows on Fox and other news outlets. He was supposed to speak at Virginia Tech, down there in rural Virginia. And he was disinvited because they thought that they might have violence or disruptions because of what he would say, because he's a conservative. Now, when he went public with this editorial in the Wall Street Journal, and said, I was disinvited. Then the Virginia guys came out and said, oh, no, 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 you were never invited. Now they've said, well, okay, it was a misunderstanding. You were kind of invited, but somebody who wrote you and invited you, and it says, you are invited to speak, didn't have the authority to do that, but we're going to let you come and speak anyway. So they're covering their tracks. But this is what I think is coming on many levels, these speech codes and everything. Now, I don't know if this is prophetic related, but this thing in Canada has been very interesting. Here's a picture of the entire town of Fort McMurray, which is a oil boom town up in the, I think it's in the eastern part, sort of to the maybe central to northern part of Alberta, way up there in Canada. There's been these massive fires. Last I heard the other day, there were 210,000 acres, bigger than the city of Chicago, was on fire. And overnight, it doubled in size. It's a massive fire. Here's a picture of the one main road. There's really only one main road north-south out of there, completely clogged with traffic, total gridlock. You can see the fires from space. It's been very warm up there. I've heard that up through that area, they've had temperatures around 90 at this time of year. It hasn't been that warm here, but the pictures are just absolutely stunning, these massive fires that have taken place. Thousands of businesses and homes have been destroyed. Here's a picture of the fires from space. You can see them. The interesting thing is that Fort McMurray is here in the bright area at the bottom. If you go north, here's a better picture. You can see Fort McMurray and its airport there in the bottom. If you go to the north, that's what they call the tar sands or the oil sands of Alberta. It's a very significant oil producing region. In fact, here's a video. There's no sound to it, mainly because it was too long to edit out sort of the F-bombs that people were dropping as they saw what was going on. But here's people fleeing the fires the other day. And this came up very, very quickly. I mean, whole neighborhoods, apartment complexes, and everything are just gone. I mean, block after block. And I've seen a number of videos where, the person is talking and all of a sudden the whole hillside behind them will explode into flames. Here's a picture of someone trying to get out of a neighborhood, and you see how the fire just kind of explodes there to the right. You see almost the flames coming over the trees and the embers flying everywhere. See how those trees just kind of explode. It does have sort of a apocalyptic thing to it, apocalyptic scenes. Of course, the world's burning down and everybody's there taking pictures with their phone and commenting on what they're doing. If you've seen some of these. But just really frightening scenes is just these walls of fire swept across and just block after block on. Now, Fort McMurray is a city of about 80,000 people. It's an oil boom town. It's grown up very quickly because of the tar sands just to the north. The oil sands, and there's a lot of discussion as to what was the cause of it. They've had a lot of fires recently on Canadian railway bridges and trestles. I've seen some just stunning pictures, arson fires. And I don't know who's doing this, but the way they get the oil from the tar sands to market is by rail. I personally think there's a connection, but I'll wait to see what the investigation shows. And this has an impact because that oil comes to the United States. It's a significant number. It's over about 2.5 million barrels of oil a day are mined out of the tar sands in Alberta. Most of them come to the United States. Remember, the president didn't want a pipeline. He wanted it to come by rail. So now what are they having? They're having fires on railways in Canada. Is there a connection? I don't know. Just put two and two together. But it says here, this article from the Wall Street said this: if oil production now threatened by the Canadian fires were halted, it would be enough to nearly wipe out the world's current oversupply. Okay? It's not an inconsequential thing. So we're all loving the lower oil prices, although they've gone up a little bit this week. They'll probably go up some more because of this fire. But so there's a glut of oil in the world. But shutting down the production there will take away the glut of oil in one fell swoop. Very interesting. Well, now I'm going to talk about, most of the rest of the time, the Middle East and Israel. Because I think that's sort of the epicenter, to borrow someone else's term, of things that are going on right now that I think are significant prophetically. Mainly the way people treat the Jewish people, Jews, how they treat the nation of Israel, and the just total chaos in the Middle East as country after country falls. And I think you'll see this. This is an editorial the other day in the Wall Street Journal about America's dangerous Middle East illusions. Nothing we've tried has worked thus far. Under the Bush administration, we went into Iraq, and what has happened? Iraq is now in chaos. In fact, there have been intrusions into the supposedly highly secure green zone, people seeing things they hadn't seen for years because they haven't been allowed to go in there. So Iraq really doesn't exist anymore. You'll see as we go through this, Syria doesn't really exist anymore. Lebanon probably doesn't exist anymore. Egypt is in problems. There are major areas. Libya is gone. I mean, you can go area after area after area through the Middle East and Northern Africa and find that there is essentially a total lack of government. Now, there is a very interesting article in this Sunday's New York Times Magazine. It is about a young man, 38, that's young to me, named Ben Rhodes. He is one of the chief foreign policy advisors for President Obama. He's a young guy. I forget what he was majoring in, but he decided that maybe I could tell stories. He wants to help tell stories. That's what he wanted to do. When 9/11 happened, he thought maybe I can help tell the story and help shape policy about this. Now, listen, that's a very postmodern approach. That's what a lot of these guys do in the church. They tell stories and narratives. And what happens? The truth is irrelevant. It's to manipulate people to think a certain way. And this, by the way, this is the New York Times that's writing this article. And I want you to listen to some of these quotes as they describe Ben Rhodes, because it's stunning that Rhodes cooperated in the article and that he was saying the thing. I would think that most people that were trying to do what he's doing would wait until we've left office. But such is the Obama administration that they get away with everything. So now they don't even have to try to hide what they've been trying to do, particularly in the area of Middle East and Iran foreign policy related to Iran. So listen to some of this stuff. As the Deputy National Security Advisor for Strategic Communications, Rhodes writes the president's speeches, plans his trips abroad, and runs communication strategy across the White House, tasks that, taken individually, give little sense of the importance of his role. He is, according to the consensus of the 24 current and former White House insiders I talked to, the single most influential voice shaping American foreign policy aside from POTUS, the President of the United States himself. He's a significant figure in the White House. Like Obama, Rhodes is a storyteller who uses a writer's... Now, this is the New York Times saying this. You need to put it in that context. is a storyteller who uses the writer's tools to advance an agenda that is packaged as politics, but is often quite personal. He is adept at constructing overarching plot lines with heroes and villains, their conflicts and motivations supported by flurries of carefully chosen adjectives, quotations, and leaks from named and unnamed senior officials. In fact, if you go back to the State of the Union address that President Obama gave a couple months ago and listen to how the adjectives that he used to describe ISIS, they're just a bunch of crazy people in pickup trucks running around the Middle East, but they're not an existential threat to us. And there's a couple paragraphs in this article. There'll be a link in the YouTube description to this article so you could read it. I would encourage you to read the whole thing. It's pretty long, but it's eye-opening in that it's, especially from where it came from. So it continues. He is the master shaper and retailer of Obama's foreign policy narratives at a time when the killer wave of social media has washed away the sandcastles of the traditional press. His ability to navigate and shape this new environment makes him a more effective and powerful extension of the president's will than any number of policy advisors or diplomats or spies. His lack of conventional real-world experience of the kind that normally precedes responsibility for the fate of nations, like military or diplomatic service, or even a master's degree in international relations, is rather than creative writing, is still startling. By the way, I played golf yesterday with an extraordinary man who is involved in the major retired general from the Air Force, still sort of involved in the defense establishment. He confirmed what I reported from the Air Force leader, General Welsh, recently, that our Air Force is not prepared for much. If we got into a major conflict, we would be in serious trouble. This man, extraordinary human being, spent 6 years in a prisoner of war camp in North Vietnam. Very humbling just to be around him. Not like this is a guy who should be involved in foreign policy, not a guy whose job is to tell a story or write a novel. But do you understand when you go back to Daniel chapter 8, and again, I'm not saying that this person that's using the stories is that. I'm just saying we live at a time when the most powerful nation on the earth is run by a man who is manipulating us through stories and narratives. That is what the coming world leader will do. He will manipulate things. That's what you should take away from it. Not that he is that person necessarily, okay? There's a lot of open questions yet on that. But you should pick up the fact that we are at a stage in our history and culture where all the major leaders of the world are involved in the same type of manipulation. Now look, they've always been involved in it to some degree, but now it's open and expected. Back to the article. When I asked John Favreau, Obama's lead speechwriter in the 2008 campaign and a close friend of Rhodes, whether he or Rhodes or the president had ever thought of their individual speeches and bits of policymaking as part of some larger restructuring of the American narrative, he replied, "We saw that as our entire job." All these newspapers used to have, this is a question to Rhodes, how do you get away with this? I mean, they used to have guys like John Burns of the New York Times, foreign policy bureaus and that type of thing. And newspapers don't have that anymore because it's too expensive. So now you have younger reporters. And so they asked Rhodes, how do you get away with it? And here's what he said. All these newspapers used to have foreign bureaus, he said. Now they don't. They call us to explain to them what's happening in Moscow and Cairo. Most of the outlets are reporting on world events. Most of the outlets are reporting on world events from Washington. The average reporter we talk to is 27 years old, and their only reporting experience consists of being around political campaigns. That's a sea change. They literally know nothing. I appreciate the honesty, but it's it's only confirmation of what I think a lot of us have used common sense to expect. Ned Price, Rhodes' assistant, gave me a primer on how it's done. The easiest way for the White House to shape the news, he explained, is from the briefing podiums, State Department, Department of the Press Secretary, Department of Justice, or whatever, from the podiums, each of which has its own dedicated press corps. But then there are sort of these force multipliers, he said, adding, we have our compadres, and I'll give them some color, and the next thing you know, lots of these guys are in the .com publishing space and have huge Twitter followings, and they'll be putting this message out on their own. They don't even have to work hard. I mean, it used to be you had to, take out a reporter and wine and dine them. Now you just give them a less than 140-word Twitter feed, and you get your message out. This is something different from old-fashioned spin, which tended to be an art best practice in person. In a world where experienced reporters competed for scoops and where carrying water for the White House was a cause for shame, no matter which party was in power, it was much harder to sustain a narrative over any serious period of time. Now the most effectively weaponized 140-character idea or quote will almost always carry the day, and it is very difficult for even good reporters to necessarily know where the spin is coming from or why. Now, they went and they interviewed Leon Panetta. He's a congressman, liberal Democrat, head of the CIA for a while, and the Secretary of Defense in the Obama administration. And he didn't have a lot of good things to say about young Mr. Rhodes. As Secretary of Defense, Panetta tells me, one of his most important jobs was keeping Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel and his Defense Minister Ehud Barak from launching a preemptive attack on Iran's nuclear facilities. They were both interested in the answer to the question, is the president serious? Panetta recalls. And if you know my view, talking with the president was, if brought to the point where we had evidence that they're developing an atomic weapon, I think the president is serious that he is not going to allow that to happen. Panetta stops. But what would you make of that same assessment now, Mr. Panetta? I ask him. Would I make that same assessment now, he asks? Probably not. It's all been fake, people. Okay, we knew that, but it's stunning. This is the New York Times. He understands the president's pivot toward Iran as a logical result of a deeply held premise about the negative effects of the use of American military force on a scale much larger than drone strikes or special forces raids. I think the whole legacy that he was working on was, I'm the guy who's going to bring these wars to an end, and the last GD thing I need is to start another war, he explains of Obama. If you ratchet up sanctions, it could cause a war. If you start opposing their interest in Syria, well, that could start a war too. And Panetta's telling his own experience at the Pentagon under Obama sometimes resembled being installed in the driver's seat of a car and finding that the steering wheel and brakes had been disconnected from the engine. Obama and his aides used political elders like him, Robert Gates and Hillary Clinton, as cover to end the Iraq war, and then decided to steer their own course, he suggests. While Panetta pointedly never mentions Rhodes' name, it is clear who he is talking about. In fact, in Foreign Policy today, came out a blog post, Thomas Ricks, writing a stunning profile of Ben Rhodes, the A asterisk, who is the president's foreign policy guru. It says this: Rhodes and others around Obama keep on talking about doing all this novel thinking, playing from a new playbook, bucking the establishment thinking. But if that is the case, why have they given so much foreign policy power to two career hacks who never had an original thought? I mean, of course, Joe Biden and John Kerry. I guess the answer can only be that these two are puppets, and as in Biden's case, are given losing propositions like Iraq to handle. Stunning article. That's out of place. By the way, I'm a lawyer. This is back to the North Carolina thing for just a moment. The American Bar Association has proposed amendments to the ethical standards for lawyers about not being allowed to discriminate. Now, as a lawyer, we're not required to take a case that we cannot ethically, that we feel that we cannot pursue. Those rules are getting on the verge of changing, and a lot of lawyers and judges conservative lawyers and judges are very concerned about it. This is all about manipulating people, cutting down free speech, taking away your freedom, and that type of thing. So it's coming everywhere. I'm sure that all agencies that license people will eventually be pressured to do the same thing. It'll come in real estate, hairdressing, anything that has a state-issued license or local-issued license. I think this is coming because they're not going to stop. It's a battle. Okay, so back to the Middle East. This is an interesting development. This is from Haaretz and other newspapers this morning. The statement has not yet been released, but supposedly the new report that's coming from the quartet of nations that are pushing for Middle East peace, they will have a strong statement condemning Israel for the building of settlements in Judea and Samaria. It will be on an order of magnitude that is unlike anything that the United States government has done in the area of foreign policy to date. It will be different. It will be done to put a lot of pressure on Israel to accept a two-state solution. It will be done to further isolate Israel from the community of nations. It is to put Israel's back to the wall to where they have no choice but to do what the world wants. Oops. Hang on here. As all of this is going on, the pressure mounts on Israel. Syria is falling apart. Aleppo, there's been a social media campaign called Aleppo is Burning. The nations of the world are trying to figure out, what do we do with Syria? How do we get through this problem? And you see here in the New York Times editorial page the other day, more carnage in Syria on one side, the other side, save Aleppo from slaughter. What did they do? They picked up on the social media push, Aleppo is burning, and it changed the news cycle. It's exactly what Ben Rhodes does every day to control the news cycle from his office in the White House. And you need to know that this is happening on a massive scale on many things. These things go viral very quickly. Well, I know a lot of you are on Facebook because I see your Facebook pages. And sometimes I see 10 or 12 of people on my friends list have all shared the same thing. It's very easy to do that. Sometimes, though, you got to be very careful because it's based on misinformation. And I'm concerned a lot of people do this. So Syria's melting down, pressure on Israel, and then in London, they elected their first Muslim mayor. Now, somebody was on one of my Facebook posts, it was in my feed the other night saying, hey, London's safe, it's no problem, this guy's not that bad, it's all made up. I don't believe it for a minute because at the same time that I'm being told, don't worry about a Muslim mayor in London, I have a friend who made a wrong turn and ended up in a neighborhood, and he was very concerned about his personal safety in London. He made a wrong turn coming out of the tube, the subway, and he ended up in a neighborhood where it wasn't an Anglican neighborhood, let's put it that way, okay? It wasn't a Baptist neighborhood, it was another religious persuasion, let's just say that. At the same time that that's happening, there's been somewhat of a scandal in the Labour Party, the left-leaning party, and the left-wing party in England about anti-Semitism. About 50 people have been suspended. There was a lady that, her name is, I believe, Shah, and she had posted this picture, Solution for Israel-Palestine Conflict, Relocate Israel into the United States. Now, I know you can send a hate mail, put it on the YouTube channel, and I'll delete it, and if you do it twice, I'll block you from posting. I do support the modern state of Israel. That should be very clear. A lot of people say, oh, well, they don't believe in God yet. They haven't turned. I know that. I know. I've been there a couple times. I know that they're not redeemed yet. But the end time prophecies, as I understand them, they've got to be back in the land for that stuff to unfold. So I don't think it's the final thing. There's a lot of work to be done yet. Okay, but stop with all these crazy Zionist conspiracy theories. Because I will tell you, you are anti-Semitic. You are anti-Jewish by throwing these things around. You disagree? Fine. Go on somebody else's YouTube channel and argue the case there. I disagree with you strongly. I can make the biblical case, and I don't have time to argue with people who are immersed in things that really are like the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is a made-up book. It's fake. So that's a sidebar comment. So go argue someplace else. This is actually one with a little bit of sound at the beginning, and then I'll drop it out. This is Ken Livingstone, who is one of the Labor Party leaders, and he was interviewed recently on an Arab station, and he said this.
The creation of the State of Israel was fundamentally wrong.
And he goes on, and he says, the creation of the State of Israel was a great catastrophe. We should have absorbed the post-World War II Jewish refugees in Britain and America. They could have been resettled, whereas 70 years later, the situation is still very tense, and there is potential for many more wars, potential for nuclear war. I've always believed that the failure to resolve the Palestinian problem fuels the terrorist attacks. What makes a 15 or 16-year-old boy go and fight with ISIS or carry out the barbaric attacks that we saw in Paris or Brussels? They don't do it because they enjoy killing, but because they believe that they are victims of injustice. The West must deal with the injustice or will continue to fuel terrorism. And he says, I support the BDS movement, boycott, divest, and sanction movement. I don't buy anything from Israel unless I made a mistake. He says that in this interview. He is anti-Semitic. He can make the case, oh no, I don't. Listen, the only place soon that Jews will be safe is Israel. And so you don't support Israel, in my view, you are anti-Semitic. Now look, I don't agree Israel is perfect. I don't worship the state of Israel, but I know that it's a part of the unfolding of God's plan in the end times. And there's still a lot of things to happen. But it's the way it is. And he's a leftist, this Ken Livingstone. And they don't, it's been common throughout Europe for a long time. Sanders, voters favor Palestinians over Israel. Liberal Democrats, the group for who U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders is the most appealing candidate in the current presidential race, sympathize more with the Palestinians than with Israel, according to a Pew poll released on Thursday. Well, this is going on in Israel. Remember the UNESCO things we talked about a couple weeks ago? It said Temple Mount, not Jewish. Hebron, not Jewish. Rachel's tomb, not Jewish. The wife of Jacob, not Jewish. None of this has connection to the Jewish people. And archaeological evidence keeps emerging almost weekly now that yes, they do have a connection to the land. Yes, there was a King David. Yes, he ruled in Jerusalem. Yes, he had a palace over here. You go to Tel Dan. They found the Tel Dan stele. We talked about the house of David from several thousand years ago. Outside the Bible. The one connected to the Bible. So somebody's made up some very clever forgeries over and over and over again and been able to bury them down there in these layers of debris and have people found. It's a very clever thing that they've done to make this impression. Look, the facts are the Jews do have a connection to that land. They long had a connection to that land. And God put them there. And God made some eternal covenants with them with regard to that land. So UNESCO comes out, and so Prime Minister Netanyahu goes, I'll tell you what, you don't understand the history, and Netanyahu's father was one of the great Jewish historians of our time. We'll have a seminar. UNESCO, come on over. We'll teach you about the Jewish connection to the land. So today, front page of the Jerusalem Post, it says, UNESCO is not really interested. Don't confuse us with the facts. Because like Ben Rose, we have a story to tell to change and manipulate people. That's exactly, this is all part of a piece. You see how they're all doing this in different areas? It's all part of the same thing. Kenneth, I'm trying to remember his name. His name is Cohen, wrote in The Guardian, the Labor Party does not have, he's a leftist, by the way. The Labor Party does not have a problem with anti-Semitism. It can isolate and treat, like a patient asking a doctor for a course of antibiotics. The party and much of the wider liberal left have a chronic condition. As I've written about the darkness on the left before, I'm not going to crow now that it has turned darker than even I predicted. There's not much to crow about, after all. I have nothing but respect for the Labor MPs, members of Parliament, who are trying to stop the party from becoming a playpen for fanatics and cranks. It just appears to me that they face interlocking difficulties that are close to insoluble. They must first pay the political price of confronting supporters from immigrant communities. There's that word. In fact, they're not even calling them immigrants in Europe now. They're starting to call them asylum seekers. Okay? Or they don't even talk about where they came from, which Labor MPs from all wings of the party have failed to do for decades. It may be high. While Ken Livingstone was forcing startled historians to explain that Hitler was not a Zionist, I was in Naz Shah's Bradford. That's the lady who put up the map about relocate Israel to the United States and then you don't have any more problems. A politician who wants to win there cannot afford to be reasonable, I discovered. He or she cannot deplore the Israeli occupation of the West Bank and say the Israelis and Palestinians should have their own states. They have to engage in extremist rhetoric of the sweep all the Jews out variety or risk their opponents denouncing them as Zionists. Allow me to state the moral argument as badly as I can. Not just in Paris, but in Marseille, Copenhagen, and Brussels. Fascistic reactionaries are murdering Jews once again. Go to any British synagogue or Jewish school and you will see police officers and volunteers guarding them. I do not want to tempt fate, but if British Jews were murdered, the leader of the Labor Party would not be welcome at their memorial. The mourners would point to the exit and ask him to leave. If it is incredible that we have reached this pass, it is also intolerable. However hard the effort to overthrow it, the status quo cannot stand. A week ago, Melanie Phillips wrote a great article. She's one of the great columnists of our time. In fact, she wrote a book 10 years ago called Londonistan. 10 years ago. They just elected a Muslim mayor. Need I say more about how I think she is able to see what's coming? She said this, the current uproar over anti-Semitism, and she lives in England, this is in the Jerusalem Post, is truly a wonder to behold. For the past 3 decades and more, anti-Semitism was the prejudice that dared not speak its name. It was deemed to have been stamped out other than among cranks on the far right. Anyone rash enough to protest the anti-Israel animus in progressive circles was a mutation of ancient Jew hatred, was told they were waving the shroud of the Holocaust to sanitize the crimes of Israel. There could be no connection. The left was institutionally anti-racist, wasn't it? On the contrary, the left is institutionally anti-Israel, and the connection is irrefutable. For sure, many who loathe Israel may not be hostile to Jews as people. Nevertheless, the narrative of Israel to which they subscribe is inescapably anti-Jew. As with classic Jew hatred, it is obsessional. No other country, however despotic or tyrannical, consumes and convulses the progressive mind as does democratic human rights-driven Israel. Among the educated classes, Israel, the target of decades of Arab exterminatory aggression, is almost universally presented as the villain and the Palestinians as its victims. Israel is held to be responsible for the absence of a Palestinian state and thus the obstacle to solving the Middle East conflict. The hostility is irrational, based on demonstrable untruths and distortions. It holds Jews, Israel, to standards expected of no other country. It denies the victimization of Jews, Israelis. It claims Jews, Israel, exercise malign and conspiratorial global influence. Last year, the Islamic advisor to Mahmoud Abbas taught on Palestinian Authority TV that the Jews throughout history have represented falsehood, evil, the devils and their supporters, the Satans and their supporters. The Palestinian Authority daily published an opinion article claiming that Jews are thirsty for blood to please their God against the Gentiles and crave pockets full of money. Children were shown on TV reciting poems portraying Jews as the most evil among creations, barbaric monkeys, and Satan with a tail. Progressive Britain never reports any of this. Instead, it amplifies the hate in its own intellectual, cultural, and media echo chamber. The result of all this and much more like it has been that for many British Jews like me, the past 3 decades have turned into a surrealist nightmare. After every war waged by Israel to prevent more of its people from being murdered, the number of physical attacks on Jews in Britain has risen. On campuses, Jewish students run a gauntlet of hatred, bigotry, and intimidation. Many British Jews fear for their children and grandchildren. An increasing number are viewing Israel as a refuge for Britain. Jeremy Corbyn has been pilloried for supporting people who want to kill Jews. But virtually the whole of the left, including Jewish leftists, supports Palestinians who teach their children to hate and kill Jews. In demanding settlers out, such progressive anti-racists support the ethnic cleansing of Jews from a future state of Palestine. You know what? Everything she's said, I support 100%, because she's exactly right. This is prophetic. This gathering of people and the nations turning against the Jewish people and the state of Israel. This is prophetic. This is what's coming. Ken Livingstone and Naz Shah may be the particularly baroque examples, but this Jew hatred goes farther, wider than either Corbyn or the Labour Party. How did it come to this, people ask? Why, while continuing to vilify Israel? This poison won't be purged until and unless they finally acknowledge the source of the contagion. Now, Canada to the north, by the way, one of their courts just held that Fatah is a terrorist organization. I wish we had a court do the same thing here in the United States. Caroline Glick also writes about this in her Friday column. I'll skip through this because we're getting late. More than absolutely necessary. There'll be a link to her article in the YouTube description. She says this: the strangest aspect of the current hullabaloo in Britain about anti-Semitism in the Labour Party is that it is happening at all. Since when has Jew hatred been something that Labour feels it's necessary to abhor? For more than a decade, the party, like the British left from whence it emanates, has provided a warm home for Jew haters. In fact, somebody writing about this went and pulled out some quotes from a leftist icon like Karl Marx that are stunningly anti-Jewish. Naz Shah, the Labour MP who set off alarms with her call to deport the more than 6 million Jews of Israel to America, has a rich history of Jew hating. Shah entered Parliament by unseating George Galloway. Galloway was expelled from the Labour Party in 2003 after he had called for British soldiers to refuse to follow orders in Iraq and sided with Saddam Hussein against his own country. But Galloway's hatred for Britain pales in comparison to his hatred for Jews. He routinely makes explicit calls for the annihilation of Israel, and for several years now, Galloway refuses to share a stage with Israelis or with Jews who do not reject Israel's right to exist. Shah didn't defeat Galloway by condemning his bigotry. She defeated him by embracing it. Anti-Semitism in Labour is not a new fringe phenomenon. In the 2005 parliamentary elections, when then Prime Minister Tony Blair was running for a third term, the party was caught twice using anti-Semitic imagery in its campaign literature. In other words, more than a decade ago, when Labour was led by a man widely considered bereft of anti-Semitic sentiments and sympathetically disposed to Israel, the party used anti-Semitism to reach out to the anti-Semitic Muslim voters, signaling them that they had a welcoming home in Labour. I would suggest to you the same operation is underway in the United States. Now I'll just want to wrap this up real quick, so give me 5 minutes. In Turkey, Turkey's a significant player in the entire time. So we have Syria, we have Lebanon melting down. Turkey, now the speaker in Turkey is calling for a religious constitution. So 100 years after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, roughly, and the secular constitution adopted under Ataturk, Erdogan wants to change it. A call by Turkey's parliament speaker for a new constitution to drop references to secularism provoked opposition condemnation. Speaker Ismail Kahraman said late on Monday that overwhelmingly Muslim Turkey needed a religious constitution, a proposal which contradicts the modern republic's founding principles. And then the Prime Minister of Turkey is resigning because he can't get along with Erdogan. Now, a lot of people, he's not a great friend of Israel, but he's sort of like been the guy that we've been in contact with to kind of keep Erdogan in check, or we think in check, with some of the things that he wants to do. So this is a significant development, I think. in prophecy. And then this yesterday from the Wall Street, years of political deadlock leave Lebanese state to unravel. Lebanon is pretty much gone. They haven't had a parliament or prime minister for a couple of years. Nobody knows what's going to happen with Lebanon. Hezbollah is probably the most influential force within what politics there are in Lebanon these days. Syria is melting down. Again, there was these reports this week. So I want to close with this. Somebody wrote in the Jerusalem Post, let's see, unrest in Baghdad, Security Council. This was in foreign policy yesterday. Al-Qaeda is about to establish an emirate in northern Syria. The Islamic State and Al-Qaeda are using different tactics in Syria, but their ultimate objective there is the same, the creation of an Islamic emirate. Whereas the Islamic State has imposed unilateral control over populations and rapidly proclaimed independence, Al-Qaeda's Syrian affiliate has moved much more deliberately, seeking to build influence in the areas they hope to rule. And when they get control, they will enact Sharia law. Now, there was I believe, there are a couple articles in the Jerusalem Post, and I'll close with this, about, one of them is written by an Israeli general, reshape the Middle East today to prevent the ISIS of tomorrow. Look, we're 100 years this year from Sykes-Picot. Sykes-Picot was really sort of Britain and France dividing up the Middle East, creating countries that really had no connection with each other. The people within that country were in opposition to each other, and mainly they were doing it to keep the French didn't want the British Empire to grow, and the British didn't want the French Empire area of influence to grow. So they reached this agreement, and it's unraveled. Because when you look around, there's no Syria, but we have maps that have Syria on them. There's no Libya, but we have maps that have Libya on them. We engage in this fiction that they're like, these countries are still there, and they're not. There's really no Iraq. So this journal has a very interesting thing, and then there's a response to it, which I think is important. To defeat ISIS, a military strategy alone is insufficient, the general says. A diplomatic and political plan is also necessary so as to ensure that the day after the victory belongs to those who oppose terrorism. ISIS is nourished by the Shiite-Sunni religious war in the Middle East. As long as the geopolitical situation encourages that war rather than diffusing it, and it's not the geopolitical situation, it's a religious battle, this organization will continue to regenerate even if it is defeated militarily. This is talking about ISIS. The solution to this mess has to be based on a division of Syria and Iraq into 4 new countries on an ethnic and religious basis to provide one of the various groups with a sense of security, independence, and prosperity. Now look, I guarantee you, and I don't have time to go into details, when a global leader comes, one of the things he will do is he will redraw the map in the Middle East. I guarantee it. It has to happen. The prophecies in Daniel indicate that this is going to happen. And so, are we in a situation where this might happen? And the answer is absolutely. So here is Syria, again, the fictional Syria that we said. So here's a solution for division. A Sunni state should be established in western Iraq and eastern Syria, whose borders would be similar but not identical to the areas now controlled by ISIS. So in other words, give up that area in eastern Syria, western Iraq, let them have it, I guess. I think he thinks they're going to get rid of ISIS if they do this. I think it's a fantasy if he's thinking that. Second, a Shiite state should be established in southeast Iraq. It's the area of Baghdad, ancient Babylon, the Euphrates River Valley, down to the Persian Gulf, which we can assume will be under strong Iranian influence. Boy, he's really going out on a limb there, isn't he? Of course it will be. A Kurdish state ought to be founded in the territory of northern Syria and northern Iraq. But Turkey won't like that, and Iran won't like that. And whatever is left of a Syrian government won't like that either. And then finally, this is kind of the region that's already been created. An Alawite state can be forged in the Damascus region and along the Syrian coastline. And that's sort of what Russia has helped put into place. Alongside these steps, he said, the world powers must also ensure that all of the various new countries respect and safeguard the rights of other minorities living within their boundaries, such as Christians, Druze, and Assyrians. Listen, the only country where that even marginally begins to occur in the Middle East today is, guess where? Israel. But they don't want an Israel, a lot of people. In response to that article, David Weinberg wrote an editorial in Friday's Jerusalem Post that said this: from disintegration to reconstruction, the crumbling of the Middle East frontiers is an opportunity to redraw national borders, but will the U.S. lead? And listen to what he says. I'll just read what he says, and you can draw your own conclusions. In any case, there is no positive vector possible unless somebody assumes global leadership of an effort to think about new diplomatic structures in order to cure the mistakes and injustices of a century ago. Just who might that global leader be? It ought to be the United States. So you draw your own conclusions from that. I don't make it up. It's a direct quote from the article. I'm just saying is I think people don't understand exactly what's coming. We have the scriptures that tell us exactly in pretty good detail how this will unfold. I just think it's a very interesting time to be alive, and now we need to go. So let's pray, and we'll talk next week. Lord, thanks again for your word. Thanks for letting us know. Lord, I pray that in light of the things that are going on, that you would steel our hearts and minds with the truth of the gospel and your word, that we might be able to share it effectively with our neighbors and friends and family in a time that it really may be very short. And give us the strength to do that. Keep us strong in the faith, committed to your word and to your Son, Jesus Christ. In Jesus' name, amen.